victory, and that is what we are fighting to achieve. But what do you want us to do if Hamas is going to ignore your polite communique and not release hostages in exchange for aid? And so I'm wondering, why do you think it is so difficult for them to say, we want Israel to win this war?
Well, I think it's because of, I mentioned earlier, what they perceive to be domestic political pressure. Kamala Harris seems to think that domestic political pressure in America over the actions of Israel could cost them a couple of seats at the forthcoming elections. In Australia, the first Muslim Australian minister appointed to the government, in this government, and going back to what I said earlier, why is it this, what's the driver of this in Muslim anti-Semitism? This first Australian Muslim cabinet member came out against Israel early on, altered Australia's vote at the UN, as far as I can see, where nothing changed in the wording put before the Security Council, but Australia went from abstaining to voting for it. There was no such thing at that point as collective cabinet.
Hey VeraCity, welcome back to the channel. It's a girl VeraMoore, and I'm back with another reaction video. Today guys, I'll be reacting to Douglas Murray Speaks, and we have Douglas Murray cancels Greta Thunberg, the spoiled little twat. Let's go.
Responsibility, which there should have been. As far as I can see, this man got his way. And I think that is going on.
Domestic political pressure that is making it difficult for Western countries to pursue what they regard as being their own vital national security interests.
There are two dynamics at play here, as far as I see it. One is on negotiating with two partners. If you have somebody who hates you and is never going to listen to you, and somebody who loves you and listens to you, who might you be at risk of talking to more?
Go on.
It's the second. If you have people in your society who are virulent anti-Semites, virulent, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, so virulent they are willing to go out week after week and shout and shout. If you have those people, and on the other hand, the people with passion on the other side are filled with decency, respect, courtesy, things that are actually the founding blocks of civilization. Again, who might impress themselves upon you more? When a Jewish pro-Israel event happens, I did a fundraiser for a university in London the other week, and at the end of the event in London, mainly Jewish audience, we sang Hatikva and then God Save the King.
Yes, we had the same. I was in London for the 100-day rally after the war and addressed the rally in Trafalgar Square, and it ended with Hatikva and God Save the King. And it was so moving to sing both of those together.
And by the way, I say this in part because have any of the protests of the so-called pro-Palestinians, why do none of them finish with God Save the King? It's because none of these protesters want God to save the King. These are not people who are pro-British. It comes back to my point. These are not people pro-Western or pro-British in any way. They would hate to sing the national anthem of my country. But the point, just to come back to this point, people underestimate the way in which a very virulent minority of people can change the weather. If I came around to your house and I made a demand of you, if I said, Elon, I would like to borrow a cup of sugar, or
Go for it, Douglas. Anything for you.
A bottle of gin.
Go for it.
And if you said...
Douglas Murray discusses how domestic political pressures influence Western countries' stances on international conflicts. He examines how Muslim anti-Semitism and political maneuvering in countries like Australia affect their decisions at the UN. How do domestic political pressures shape a country's foreign policy, especially in conflicts like the Israeli-Palestinian one?
To ask for. Doesn't sound to me like it's being said in a very pacifist tone of this. When you get people calling for intifada on the streets of London, and as you know, we've had a taste of intifada on the streets of London, so I do not like being talked to in that tone of voice. When you have people on the streets of London calling for intifada, that is
Ironically, on the tube, right? They're calling for suicide bombings on public transport while they're riding the tube.
And then there are the people who are calling simultaneously for a ceasefire and intifada. We don't know how those people's brains work. But
Well, I think it makes perfect sense. They want the Jews to cease so they can fire.
Very good. But you know, these people, they turn up and they make very clear threats to the society. Why do the police in cities like London, why are they so weak, apart from their direction?
And I've seen them asking people to remove Union flags in Scotland, asking one gentleman to cover up his Star of David.
Yeah, it just happened the other day. And these people, these police, if you see, they're scared. They're outnumbered. If they went in and arrested the big bearded man shouting for jihad on the streets, they'd have a riot on their hands. I think they should go and arrest him. I think they should get more and more policemen. They should go in with riot shields and they should go and arrest the bugger. But anyway, the point is that if that person is calling for violence on the streets, as they clearly are, that will have an effect, particularly on weak people, weak leaders. It will have an effect. Whereas the people who are nice and decent and respectful and thank the police officers after the demonstration, they might impress them with their courtesy, but they're not going to terrify them into action.
Douglas, it's disturbing to think that part of the job of trying to tell Israel's story is not happening on an even playing field, because there is so much violent intimidation happening on the other side, and still trying to persuade the media through respectful and peaceful language. I want to talk to you a little bit about the media atmosphere.
You can do respectful, I'll do peaceful.
Okay. Well, you know, it's becoming increasingly difficult to be respectful when coming up against the sheer deluge of lies and vitriol.
Oh, I know. I mean, every day we have to shovel through huge steaming piles of horse shit.
It is. and it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain that facade of being passive-aggressive. I want to show you one example, actually, because I think sometimes people don't understand how the media will manipulate things against us. This was an exchange I had just the other day on Channel 4 with Krishnan Gurumurthy, who was asking me about the 13 UNRWA staff members.
Murray talks about the violent rhetoric of groups like Muslims Against the Crusades and the challenges faced by law enforcement in managing such threats. He contrasts this with the peaceful and respectful behavior of pro-Israel demonstrators. What are the implications of violent versus peaceful protests on public perception and government action?
I'm not privy to what intelligence has been passed between our agencies. Continue to harangue, so you don't know, you don't have evidence, you don't have evidence, you don't have evidence. And I pushed back and I said, I can't speak specifically to that, but that's the tip of the iceberg of the collusion and complicity between UNRWA and Hamas, because there was literally a Hamas server farm underneath UNRWA headquarters, leaching its electricity. And he pushes back and, well, let's have a watch and see how that exchange went. This was cut from the broadcast interview. They put it up online after I complained.
Oh.
I can tell you what we did expose this week. We revealed that Hamas had been running a massive server farm, the nerve center of its intelligence operations, from a bunker 20 meters underneath the UNRWA compound in Gaza. Not only that, it had been leaching
Can we stick to these allegations? Well, because again, these are claims that you're making. They can't be confirmed.
No, these aren't claims that we're making, Krishnan. No, we took journalists.
They are literally claims that you're making, and they can't be verified.
The New York Times. Krishnan, the New York Times was one of many international media outlets that was embedded with the Israeli army and went to see and photograph for themselves the Hamas server farm underneath UNRWA's compound in Gaza.
So he keeps hammering back on this very specific point. When I said, look, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Reuters, AP, AFP, they were all there. They went to see it for themselves. And one of the challenges then is that I find anything the Palestinians say will automatically and uncritically be parroted, including casualty numbers presented by Hamas. The same Hamas that claims to have destroyed 1,000 Israeli tanks didn't happen. Whereas anything that Israel says is, Israel claims we haven't been able to independently verify it. These are just claims you're making, even when these are claims in which the international... Why do you identify within the Western media this proclivity to accept uncritically what the Palestinians say, and anything Israel says is always treated much more suspect?
First of all, I don't want Krishnan Gurumurthy over my shoulder this much longer.
Fixed.
Yeah. It was unnerving me. Well, one explanation for that is what's known as Moynihan's Law. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the late great Democrat senator, had a term which he used when he was ambassador to the United Nations in the 70s, which was that there is an intrinsic problem in democracies and countries that respect human rights, which is that these countries are countries in which human rights abuses get reported. In time, he pointed out, it's possible that since you do not hear of human rights abuses in countries that do not care about human rights, you will only hear about them in the countries that do. And in time, you may come away with the idea that the countries that most abuse human rights are the ones that abuse them the least.
Because they report them.
Because they report them. Right. So, for instance, when Israel makes any mistake on the battlefield, it's out there. There's, nothing you can do, like that horrible, tragic incident with the 3 hostages who were shot.
Yeah.
I mean,
and by the way, sometimes I find, and it's extremely painful for me, when interviewers bring up the 3 hostages who were tragically shot by our forces, and sometimes...
Murray explores the biased media portrayal of the Israeli-Hamas conflict, highlighting how Western media often uncritically accepts Palestinian narratives while scrutinizing Israeli statements. He introduces Moynihan's Law to explain this bias. How does media bias influence public opinion and international policy regarding conflicts like the one between Israel and Hamas?
Draw what do you want them to lose? For instance, very, very important dynamic. But this one about believing Hamas and not believing Israel, it's an extension of something I've seen all my life covering the conflicts in this region, which is that it's just a lot easier to take that view. It's a lot easier to take Hamas's body count figures and just report them. A bomb landed an hour ago, 500 people are dead, strangely round number, considering it took months for Israel to work out how many people were killed on the 7th of October, because it takes time. But there's a reason why people accept those figures, and they accept them because it's a lot easier than sending your own journalists into an incredibly dangerous area with an incredibly dangerous group of people, Hamas, and trying to verify it.
To the credit of the international media, they do press on the question of why their journalists are not allowed independent access into Gaza, and the Israeli Supreme Court has already ruled on that issue because of fears about exposing troop movements.
Yeah, and but the point with this is, if they do want to go like that, they know how dangerous it would be. If you're a Western journalist, you can put your life in the hands of the IDF and in bed with the IDF in Gaza, as I've done, or you could try to go in with Hamas, and you better keep your fingers crossed.
And then we've seen in previous conflicts as well, where they then will never release footage, when the journalists have been in Gaza, never release footage of dead Hamas terrorists, never release footage of rockets being fired from the middle of urban areas, because they know that Hamas will dictate the terms of what they can let out of Gaza. And they know in this war as well that the information coming out of Gaza is what Hamas wants them to see.
I've seen this all my life in this conflict. I have a friend who's a Palestinian journalist who lives in Jerusalem, who you probably know, who can't go to the West Bank since he was rude about Yasser Arafat many years ago, and exposed his corruption and so on. It was made perfectly clear to my friend that if you come back, you'll be hanged from a lamppost. Well, Palestinian journalists learn from that sort of thing. I can't help.
And therefore self-censor.
Yes. And Palestinian journalists in Gaza, are you joking? By contrast, I do notice that the Israeli media...
The discussion focuses on the global reaction to Hamas's actions and the challenge of reporting accurate casualty figures. Murray explains the dangers faced by journalists in Gaza and the manipulation of information by Hamas. What are the ethical responsibilities of journalists in conflict zones, and how can they balance safety with accurate reporting?
Wing more violently in another direction.
My prediction has always been that the aim of Western governments in relation to the issues and which we all face is to try to avoid a point of clarification, by which I mean that it becomes as clear a conflict as it could become. Israel can no longer live in that point of unclarity. And I don't think most of the Israeli people want to.
Wow, I so much love listening to Douglas Moore. He always makes so much sense in his arguments. I mean, he's always so honest and so right. Douglas Moore for president. I love the way he answers all the questions with such honesty and clarity. The media is sitting on the lap of Hamas and piloting their propaganda. Douglas Moore has such a deep insight into politics. I love the fact that Douglas always stands for the truth every time. But honestly, I wish the man in time would stop interrupting Douglas like he kept interrupting him. But this was absolutely amazing. This was absolutely interesting to watch. I love the way they were spitting facts, and Douglas Moore is always a man of wisdom. What are your takes on this? What are your thoughts? Drop your comment down below. I totally enjoyed this. If you enjoyed this video as much as I did, give it a huge thumbs up and please share this video. And if you're new to the channel, join VeraCity. Hit the subscribe button below, turn on the post notification bell so that you can always be the first person to know whenever a new video drops. And that's, guys, see you in my next one. Bye, guys.